Welcome to Raptors Weekly for the week of July the 20th. Special guest on the show today. He's special because it's so rare to have him on, so we're excited that he can join us today. Tim Chisholm.
It is my pleasure. I'm very excited.
So before the listener gets angry, it's not Tim W, guys. It's Tim Chisholm. Totally different person, different opinions, more rational.
Sure. I like that. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, good. So lots has happened since the last time we spoke. The playoffs happened, the exit happened, and then the summer started, and the Raptors started free agency. With aplomb, basically, making all their moves early and certainly with certain intents and purposes. They weren't shaky or wavering in what they wanted to do, and they got to business right away and tried to address at least what they perceived as issues last season. So the first guy, obviously, we have to talk about and get your take on is DeMar Carroll, who on paper is really the antidote for the Raptors' ails, I guess. Ails being defense and three-point shooting. So just the initial reaction to DeMar Carroll and also the money aspect, I guess, because that seems to be a talking point.
Yeah, well, I mean, the signing, it's sort of hard not to like. I mean, it's been written about a lot, but I mean, this is the kind of guy they've been going after since, the last 10, 15 years. I mean, the one that actually popped into my mind immediately when I thought about it is how he's a much better version of what the Raptors were trying to turn Mo Pete into for like 6 years. Mm-hmm. And the sort of 3-and-D guy and spacing the floor, but low maintenance and all the rest of it. And so, I mean, the thing that actually sort of impressed me about it in the end, though, was that at the time, before they'd signed him, everybody thought they were just going to wait, find out what happens with LaMarcus Aldridge and what their interview with him. And then, when they inevitably didn't get him, they would sort of go about their summer. But, I mean, Carroll was like the 5th or 6th free agent to fall off the board to the Raptors. They got him quick. So it was good. And, I mean, we'll see how the fit works. I mean, it's going to take a little bit of the team playing in a style that gets him looks as opposed to the ISO ball that dominated last year, and a bit to him about finding opportunities for his offense. But on defense, it's nothing but a plus. I mean, they've needed a guy like this for so long. So to that point, then the money doesn't really bother me. The cap's going to fly up and they'll manage to absorb it. And I guess we'll sort of go from there. But it's one of those deals now because he's the highest paid Raptor that looks bonkers. But next summer, if they re-sign DeRozan, they re-sign Valanciunas, it's going to look like chump change in the end.
Yeah. Dwayne Casey's on record as saying that after the signing that one of the problems the Raptors had last year was that DeMar DeRozan and Terrence Ross weren't really big enough to guard the big wings of the league, and that was their primary motivation in getting a guy like Carroll, who's who's tall, who's lanky, who's athletic, who uses his height well and his reach well. What did you make of that? He kind of absolved DeMar DeRozan and Terrence Ross by making that comment, saying that they're kind of up against it every night, and it's not their fault that they're overmatched and they're getting killed on defense. It's just they're not supposed to be. They're just not equipped to handle that. So what did you make of those comments?
I mean, I get what he's doing in terms of sort of sticking up for the players. I don't really buy it. I mean, this is still a team that 2 years ago, it wasn't nearly as big a problem. You still wanted to find a bigger wing, and they went out and got James Johnson. But the fact that James Johnson was their solution last year goes to show you where on the pecking order of problems they saw it. I mean, Terrence Ross on defense this year was horrible. And we can talk about this ankle thing that's come out of nowhere all of a sudden, and you can talk about other teams game planning for him better and all the rest of it. But I don't really buy that as a valid excuse for those two guys completely crapping the bed when it came to defense. And they really did. And not only that, it wasn't really size that was killing them. It was speed that was killing them. And that's not really what you bring Carroll in for. I mean, he's going to be helping to go up against guys like James and Durant and George and all the rest. But at the end of the day, the thing that really killed that team on defense last year was dribble penetration. And so they're still going to have to figure out, with DeRozan in the starting five and Ross off the bench, they're still going to have to work their tails off to start improving their foot speed and their anticipation on these guys on the drive.
Let's talk about defense for a bit. So, a lot of the summer moves so far have just been, strengthening the defense. So the exit of Vasquez, he was probably a scapegoat, but also a big culprit in why the defense was kind of poor. He saw a lot of minutes and really didn't play any sort of defense. So that he's out. DeLon Wright, a defensive guy, is in. DeMar Carroll is in. He's a defensive guy. You got Corey Joseph, who's a decent defender at his position. And so that's kind of been the theme of the offseason so far, is that we got DeMario Carroll finally to plug that hole at the small forward. We're drafting with defense in mind. We're getting rid of guys who don't play defense. Wink, wink to Rosen. Do you buy that the defense has actually improved, or what does Casey has to do to actually to get more out of this defense? Or is it just like, oh, I got the personnel now, so I can finally play the scheme I was playing last year? Or does it force him to do something different? Or does he play the angle that now I finally have the personnel to execute what I've always been trying to do?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, he's been out there talking about how he's going to redesign the offense or the defense a little bit. Ujiri's been preaching the same thing too, and steering guys more towards the baseline than down the middle and all the rest. But I mean, I guess what it kind of comes down to is that notion of how much of defense is rooted in kind of that team philosophy, chemistry kind of stuff. Because he does bank on a lot that, in the 2 years prior, they were a legitimate defensive team, not necessarily a powerhouse, but they played it. And this year it fell off a cliff. And, you look at bringing in a guy like Lou Williams, you look at maybe the friction in the locker room that happened because of the leash that Lou Williams was given. Maybe it now has guys chafing a little bit at having to work that hard on the defensive end. And I guess that you bring in all these sorts of guys, and maybe they as individuals aren't now covering up as much for the specific problems that you had last year, so much as maybe now all the sub guys, all the second tier guys, third tier guys are, if not defense first, at least it's a major part of their game. And so I guess you sort of see if that philosophy affects your top line guys. Does Lowry try a bit harder now? Does DeMar try it all? Does Valanciunas? I mean, it was not really an effort thing with Valanciunas, but figuring out whether or not all of that sort of stuff evens out, because at the end of the day, those are still the guys that are going to get all the minutes or the big heavy minutes. And so if they don't pick it up on defense, I don't care how hard DeMario Carroll tries. I don't care how many garbage minutes Biyombo gets in the front court. I mean, these are not going to be enough to plug the holes if the main stars don't buy in. And so we'll have to see if these guys can ratchet them back up.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like even though we were improved positionally at point guard, at small forward, arguably at center with just Biyombo in there, even though he's not going to play much. Those aren't the constraints to your defense. Your constraints are DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, who play a ton of minutes, and it doesn't really matter what you do at the other positions. If those two are leaking points or leaking penetration, it kind of all goes for shit.
Yeah, and especially if they're leaking it into the post, where you've got Valanciunas now trying to chase around all these guys, and his foot speed at this point has become a problem. And they say that, okay, well, now they're spending the summer working on his foot speed, but he's still a big hulking 7-footer. He's not going to start moving around the court like Anthony Davis. So, yeah, I mean, they're still going to be the reason why this team succeeds or fails, both in general, both on offense and on defense. Yeah. So I hope that these guys can sort of change the chemistry in the locker room to get everyone to buy in again, but it's one of those things you kind of can't really predict until you see it.
Exactly. So, I mean, you could take two angles at this. One is that you're only as good as how good your best players are, and our two best players haven't really changed this summer. Like, if you really wanted to make a big improvement, you gotta upgrade your best player, and that hasn't happened. We've peppered good role players around our existing best players, and again, we can talk about it all we want, but until we play a few games, we really don't know. And the fact that we're changing role players and not star players just tells me that there's that much more ask of Dwayne Casey that next year, is because he really has to figure out how to work people with specific skill sets into a larger play. And I I'm a skeptic of Dwayne Casey at this point, so I don't know if he can do it. I look at DeMario Carroll, like 85% of his shots are assisted, coming from a great Atlanta Hawks system. Corey Joseph coming from a Spurs system. These guys are used to playing in a very organized manner, and now they're coming to the Raptors, and Dwayne Casey's been is going to have to find roles for these guys. And like on the last week's podcast, Blake said, that's a great thing for Dwayne Casey because he finally has guys who can play, who just can fit in. But on the other hand, it's like now he has guys who have expectations that they're going to be following a specific role, and now he's going to create that role for them.
And that's the thing that almost worries me about it. I mean, I'm really high on the guys they brought in, so long as you've decided that you're keeping your core the same. Then I think they did a really good job of augmenting them. But yeah, at the end of the day, you still got Casey having to tweak the way in which he approaches things in such a way that it makes use of the fact that these are your guys coming in now. I mean, are you going to maybe lessen the dependence on ISO ball a little bit, lest you have guys like maybe Carroll and Joseph now playing a bit beyond their capabilities? I mean, the thing about someone like Lou Williams is he's still a very strong isolation player. It's just that kind of mentality started leaking all over the roster, and everyone thought they were a great one-on-one player. Where these guys, my worry would be that if you don't try to at least partially re-engineer the offense to bring some passing into it, I mean, if you end up starting Patterson, he's a pretty strong passer. Lowry's a good passer. DeRozan doesn't have the greatest court vision, but he's good at passing out in pre-established schemes. There's the possibility of it happening, but it's really going to have to come from the coach basically saying, we can't just immediately go to the bailout. We can't immediately devolve into ISO play if they take away the first option. And I don't know that in the past Casey has really hammered his star players on those kinds of things, and that was part of the problem in the locker room last year. And it'll be interesting to see if now, with his job a bit on the line, if he starts tightening the leash a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Valanciunas, who we're kind of talking about as being the anchor of the defense, and how penetration gets funneled towards him, and it doesn't really matter what happens if he's your center. But hey, guess what? Good news. He's been working on his quickness, and a quote was, "I was working on my shot selection. I was working on my quickness, bringing my game to being like power forward, not like slow center." So the transformation of Jonas Valanciunas into Draymond Green is underway, Tim. So we should feel good about that. What do you think of this this play by Dwayne Casey of kind of changing the way Valanciunas approaches the game? Do we look at it as a positive, as something he's trying to change a player kind of early in his career, or is he trying to do square peg round hole? Because Valanciunas is what he is. He's pretty good at what he does. He has some weaknesses, but we're kind of asking him to really alter his approach and alter his physique, just his approach to the game. What do you think of this potential transformation?
Well, here's the funny thing about it for me. Wasn't this the Valanciunas that they were promising when they drafted him? I mean, at the time, no one was talking about how he's going to be this hulking guy down in the post-ups. It was all talking about pick and roll. They were comparing him to Joakim Noah. They're comparing him to Marcus Camby. I mean, that was the Valanciunas they were kind of pitching on the fan base when they first drafted him. And then after his rookie year, it's like, no, he's got to add size. No, he's got to add the post game. And he spends 2 years doing that. And now the complaint is that, well, now he's kind of too slow. He's too plodding. He lives in the paint too much. So I almost feel like what they're doing now is reverting back to the kind of guy that they thought they were getting right out of the gates. I mean, it's practical. That's what they need him to be able to do. Because if you're looking at this guy, and I think especially if you're looking at a guy that might now have to make the max deal after what Enes Kanter got in Oklahoma City, you're going to need to be able to rely on him for more than 27, 28 minutes a game. And if you're going to do that, you need him to be able to do certain things like space the floor a little bit and move away from the basket and move his feet on defense. So I think what they're doing is a necessity, but I feel like they really are yo-yoing with him about what they want him to be from year to year. And I wonder in the long run if that affects his development in any one area.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because poor Valanciunas. I feel sorry for him. Like, he just seems to be, the butt of every joke and at the end of every criticism that seems to be around the Raptors. And now they're asking him to change his game. I hopefully it works. I just foresee that at least next year there are going to be situations where he's going to be thinking faster than he moves, where he thinks he's a small ball guy, but physically he'll still be the big hulking dude he really is. And it's going to result in some hilarity. I'm looking forward to that.
But that's actually a really good point too, because the other side of it is that one of his problems at this point, being a young player, is that he still isn't at a place where he is thinking as fast as a player as you'd want him to. And if you're going to continually reinvent his game, which means you're sort of hitting the reset button a little bit on his instincts on the floor, you're now just kind of pushing that place where he's now completely comfortable out there and playing completely on instincts another year down the road.
Yeah.
So that's, even if they make him a more appropriate player to their system, you might end up delaying the maximum impact of that by a year by doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's already a guy who struggles keeping his mind aligned with what his body is doing. And now you're adding another layer of complexity, which I don't know if he's going to handle. I'm not saying he's a dumb player. I just think that he feels comfortable playing a certain way. And anything else he has to kind of retrofit into his brain, and it doesn't always fit. Like he's not a guy you just plug in at the 5, at the 4, and he'll just figure it out. He's not like Luis Scola, somebody you can plug in at 4 and 5 and he'll figure it out, or DeMario Carroll at 3, 4, 5, whatever. He's a guy who's used to playing a very particular type of way, and anything else, so far at least, he hasn't shown that he's not open to it, but really capable of.
Yeah, I agree.
And while we speak, just a tweet came up from Adrian Wojnarowski
I saw that
Kyle Lawson has been traded to Houston. So I wonder what they got back in return, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Let's switch to some Corey Joseph talk. Big money move back to Toronto for Corey Joseph, $7 million a year. Like when he got signed, I thought it was a bit overpayment. Maybe the Canadian the nationality tax was paid there on the contract. But overall, your thoughts on Corey Joseph as I'm guessing backup point guard at this point?
Yeah, I'd say backup 1-2. I mean, my guess is that they probably want to do with him a little bit is sort of mush together some of Lou Williams and Grievous Vasquez's role. And so I guess with Joseph, my thinking is that I have no faith in Terrence Ross off the bench. I'm going to say that right now. None whatsoever. So I'm looking at Joseph.
I don't think Terrence Ross has faith in Terrence Ross, but go ahead.
Seriously, yeah. So for me with Joseph, it's can what he brings to defense in combination with the offense that can that ultimately make up for the pure offense that you got from Lou Williams-ish? I mean, he's not going to score 16, 17, 18 points a game, but can he do enough at the other end of the floor where maybe he's now preventing 3 or 4 points at that end? He's scoring like 12 points a game. I mean, it's just, for me, it's a matter of where does that all sit. They clearly think that he has another gear. I mean, the money says it. I think the even the way they presented him says it. I mean, they're putting a lot of pressure on his shoulders, and I think that they feel that what he did in San Antonio was 2/3 of what they feel he's capable of. It's always a bit of a dangerous play when you do that because you really are going completely on faith that kind of investment is going to pan out. But I like the idea behind it. I like the idea that you've got a guy who is young and hungry, who you're going to try to maybe give a little bit more leash to and give him the opportunity to prove that he's the sort of player that he thinks he is. I like the idea that he'll actually be able to stay in front of his guy more so than Windmill Vasquez. But I mean, but again, it's a crapshoot. I mean, he's the one guy of all the guys they signed this summer where you're kind of projecting for him more than anything that he's shown. I think the other 3 guys, you know what you're getting. They're going to be put in roles that fit that exactly. And Joseph is the one where they're hoping we've got another gear here and it's going to validate the role and the money. Yeah.
You're basically hoping that a guy who's proven that he's a system guy so far in the league is actually more than just a system guy. He's got 2 or 3 levels to him, I guess.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I got to ask is that who's he going to play with? I mean, there's nobody on the bench. I mean, he's basically going to be arguably the best player off the bench at this point. I mean, last year Dwayne Casey liked to do hockey lineups and 5 in, 5 out. If he does that this year, you're looking at Corey Joseph playing with Luis Scola and Biombo or something. That's
oh God.
So I guess the onus is on Dwayne Casey to actually get creative, but not just with the defense, but with the offense now.
Yeah, I think so. And you cannot do those 5-man switches anymore. You can't go 5 bench players on the floor. I mean, situationally it might happen every once in a while, but as a regular function of the rotation, you can't do it. You do not have the offense to get away with it. There's no reason to go long stretches of any game without at least one of Lowry, DeRozan, or Valanciunas on the floor. And for exactly that reason, because I think with a guy like Joseph, you don't want to push him so far beyond anything that he's done so far that he now has no practical instinct for how to actually play that way on the court. You want to at least maintain a sort of semblance of similarity to his role in San Antonio and just give it like a +1, like a little bit more, see how he deals with it and gradually build it up. Because, yeah, off the bench, like I said, no faith in Terrence Ross. James Johnson's a wild card. Scola is probably the highest IQ player they have off the bench now, but you don't really want to assign anything to him on a night-to-night basis beyond heady play and good passing.
Mm.
And I don't know if he's going to try to work Bebe or Bruno into the rotation. I can't imagine he will. But the interesting guy in that situation is how much faith he has in Norman Powell, because the team loves him, and I see him and Ross kind of going at it. I mean, Ross obviously has way more experience and has a head start by a mile in terms of a spot in the rotation. But if injuries falter or falter the rotation, or Ross starts to have one of his confidence lapses, I'd be curious to see if Powell manages to get a sniff on the court.
I'll tell you one thing. Obviously, Terrence Ross is a more experienced player in this league, but basketball is so much about confidence. And I saw Norman Powell play in Summer League. Granted, it's Summer League, man, but this guy, he believes that he belongs in the NBA. And now with his contract, he actually does. So if it's between Terrence Ross and Norman Powell, it's Ross's 3-point shooting that's going to get him through that, because in the confidence department, Powell is just way ahead of him right now, and it just the shot making ability, and not just like spot up shooting, but take 2 drives in, confidently pull up or lean in, or just drive in for the layup. Powell has that. Like, he made moves in Summer League that I haven't seen Terrence Ross make in his 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's you want to throw it's Summer League caveat out there, but at the same time, Terrence Ross was terrible at Summer League.
Yeah.
Like, Norman Powell vastly outplayed Summer League Terrence Ross. And I agree. Powell, I think the thing that's the most impressive about the way that he played was that he played completely within the flow of the game. And all of those moves, all of the little, herky-jerky moves around the basket and the straight line drives, and when he would pull up for shots, I mean, it demonstrated an awareness of what the game was giving him and how he could exploit it. And it's something that I think going into his 4th year, we still haven't seen Terrence Ross demonstrate. And it's always been the issue with him. He'll have a great night and then disappear, and then he'll have another terrible night and then he'll show up. And it's, at this point, you kind of rather have a guy that you could depend on. Now, I'm not saying that's Norman Powell at this point either, because he hasn't played a single NBA game. But for me, the patience is running really thin on Ross, and I'd be curious to see what happens if he plays as poorly off the bench this coming season as he has in the stints that he's had in the last 3 years.
Yeah, Terrence Ross is he's probably replaced Valanciunas as the whipping boy at this point. But Dwayne Casey had a funny little comment, and I don't think he meant this, but he said it anyways. Was that he thinks Terrence Ross is going to be next year's Lou Williams. That was a direct quote. Basically, he sees Terrence Ross taking over the offense, kind of like Lou Williams did last year. I don't know what was going through his mind. Probably a brain fart, but. What are your thoughts there? Like, what do you think he meant when he said Terrence Ross might actually be a bigger part of the offense?
I hope he meant that he'd be getting some of the shots that Lou Williams got, because there's no way, as even Casey's biggest critics can't assume that he feels that that Ross has any ability to create offense in the way that Lou Williams does. And so I assume that's sort of what it was. I mean, maybe it's him trying to perk up Ross after they basically replaced him somewhat permanently in the starting lineup. But yeah, I mean, if that's what he actually thinks, if that's actually his plan going into the regular season, that's a terrifying prospect. And I'm gonna hold out hope that it's just a matter of there's other factors in play with that quote, and it does not reflect how he anticipates using Terrence Ross next year.
Let's switch to some draft talk. We talked about Norman Powell. Just a closing thoughts on Norman Powell. I did the recap of the second Summer League game, or the second to last one, the one they got eliminated. And he had 2 defensive plays there, where once on the inbound, he actually read the play and got a weak side block on a guy who's taller than him at the rim. And then he left his own man and got a block on another guard using that 6'11" wingspan he has. And just going back to the Terrence Ross talk, I mean, those are the kind of plays that I really expected Terrence Ross to be making on a nightly basis. Like, we don't one of those like hustle, read plays, kind of a step ahead of the defense, and you kind of anticipate and use your athleticism to pull through. That's the part that I've always looked to Terrence Ross to do. And with the exception of like 2 or 3 games, And this one time he kind of shut down Chris Paul. I remember in LA. It just hasn't happened, and I'm transferring my hopes from Terrence Ross to Norman Powell slowly but surely.
Well, I mean, it's always kind of fun to sort of have that great. I mean, like, well, and we'll talk about Wright in a bit, but I mean, he have a pretty good sense of like who he is, what kind of his ceiling is, and all the rest of it. Powell is that X factor right now with the team, and he had such a good summer league, and everyone's talking about him. ESPN is talking about him, and it's exciting, and I think it's useful that he plays the same position as Terrence Ross, and he's doing a lot of the things that people had hoped Ross would do, save for the 3-point shooting, and yeah, it's you don't want to allow the lack of actual NBA quality play in the summer to pervert your thoughts about how good he is, but yeah, he just has a feel for the game that Ross never did. It's funny, you kind of go back to guys' original scouting reports when they were coming into the league, back, Draft Express scouting reports and all the rest. And it's funny how often they actually managed to pan out. I mean, the knock on Ross was that he's a guy that can kind of float in and out of the game, and it's proven to be, no matter anything else he's learned, any other skills, any other roles that the coach has given him, that's still his MO. Is he's still a guy that floats in and out of games, and you almost get irritated when he'll have a game like he's manages to shut down a guy like Chris Paul or go long stretches last year, 2 years ago against John Wall, because it kind of gives you this false sense of, well, that's what he's capable of. But again, guys in the NBA are capable of doing all sorts of things. It's the guys that do it every single night that actually make your team better. And I find I get really irritated with guys when they'll do it once in a while because the coach is going to keep trotting them out there and hoping they can recapture that magic. And in reality, it was just as much a fluke as back when like Jerome Moiso had back-to-back double-doubles. These things don't happen every night.
Let's switch to DeLon Wright, who you mentioned there. The Raptors got him with the 20th pick. Again, a defensive move here, a senior. So the Raptors drafted 2 seniors in the draft, which is a nice change. I like that. I like that. Last year was the project pick with Bruno. This year they went with 2 guys who are far more ready to contribute this year than say Bruno or whoever the guy before that was. DeLon Wright is a 6'5", defensive-minded guy. He's a quarterback in terms of a point guard. He's organized. He doesn't shoot that great, but then again, he's 36% last year from 3 in Utah. Your thoughts on DeLon Wright just as a value at the 20th pick?
I think it was totally the right move. I think that it's the kind of guy that you want to have in reserve. I mean, I think there was a pretty good supposition once the Spurs we knew we were going after LaMarcus Aldridge, which we knew before the draft, that a guy like Corey Joseph was going to let go, and the lines drawn to the Raptors were pretty easy to draw. So it was never like Wright was ever looked at as a guy that was going to immediately be the backup. But I think one of the things that really hampered the team last year was not having a proper third point guard. And this way you kind of secure that because he's a senior and he'll be ready to play some minutes, and there'll be instances when Lowry gets injured or has to sit out a couple games where you'll be glad to have him. I think it was honestly the perfect pick for the team and where they're at. And there might have been more upside guys, but I think he still has, maybe like another spot he can climb up the ladder. But he's just like a steady, high IQ, a smart quarterback for the offense. And I like that he's a different look than both Lowry and Joseph, so that you're actually got a guy too that if the game dictates a certain kind of flow, you have another look you can throw at the defense. So in terms of his fit with the Raptors, and the defensive thing is icing, because at this point everybody they brought in was defense, but at the point of attack it's been a particular problem. So I'm all in on that drafting.
I compare him to Sean Livingston, even though Sean Livingston's 2 inches taller. I kind of hope he has a similar career where he's got, he's lengthy, he can use his body well. From based on the YouTube clips I'm talking about here, and he does have a bit of an offensive game. It's not like he's a dud on offense. He has a slight post-up game. If that matures, it might mean something. But I don't know. I'm kind of one of those scoring point guards. I kind of see him being at 6'5". He's got the right size, so he should be able to at least have a productive NBA career just based on his existing skill set and size. So we'll see how that goes. Mm-hmm. So moving on, lots of topics here. Let's talk about Louis Scola for a second here. He was one of the last free agents the Raptors got. Basically, no contending team went after Scola. He's 35. Even though he had a strong year in Indiana, Nobody quite came calling, and he ended up going to the Raptors. I mean, I wrote about this. I'm ecstatic with this pick. I think the Raptors have always lacked that veteran leadership or even veteran presence in the locker room. No offense to Chuck Hayes, and you get Scola basically for free on a 1-year deal. Thoughts on the Scola pickup?
I loved it. I was surprised that a team like the Clippers were never really linked to him, especially when it looked briefly like they wouldn't have DeAndre Jordan coming back. I mean, he's just such a tailor-made player for one of those high-end teams to just have in reserve. But their loss is Toronto's gain. I mean, I totally agree with you. I think that there's a difference between having a veteran on your team that exists purely as a veteran in the locker room, like a Chuck Hayes, versus the veteran that you have on your team that's also out there playing. And Scola will have a role with the team. He'll definitely play. He's still effective. He had a good bounce back year last year in Indiana. And I think that he's a guy that does so many little things well. I mean, it's an imperfect comparison, but it sort of reminds me a little bit of the kind of effect that Oakley had when he was with the Raptors. And not in that, beating Carter into submission kind of thing, but just a guy that sort of knew the angles on the court. He knew how to adjust the flow of the game from a position that didn't dominate the ball. He's just a very, very heady player. And I think that there were long stretches last year with the Raptors where you wish you had that guy out on the court. And I'm sure it's no coincidence that that's why the Raptors went after him in the first place, and especially going after a veteran guy that could actually still log minutes. I think it's an absolutely zero downside move, 100%. It's a guy that – and the other thing that I really like about him too is his passing. Because, we talk a lot about guys that they've brought in who have defensive acumen, but they've actually brought in a couple of guys, not including Biyombo, who have strong passing instincts. And so if we talk about going back to Carroll and Joseph and guys that are used to coming from systems that have a lot more ball movement, that you need to bring in players that can not only defend but can also move the ball. And I think Scola is excellent at that, and I'll be very curious to see if Casey is able to utilize that skill better than he has in the past.
The one thing I noticed in Summer League about Lucas Nogueira, Abebe, is that he's a very good passer, or at least he's a very willing passer. And I haven't really clued on to this until this Summer League, where I noticed that you give him the ball at the top of the key on the roll, he always seems to find another big or another wing very effectively. So I don't know if that's him scared of taking the shot himself, or him just being on the lookout for other players all the time. Whatever it was, I really liked what he brought to the offense, surprisingly, as a passer.
Yeah, me too. There was one point, I think I even tweeted about it. I didn't tweet much during Summer League, but there was one, I think it was in the second game, he got the ball at the top of the key and threw down a high-low pass that was an important play in that particular game. But yeah. And that's the thing for me that really stuck with me, is that this is a guy that could find ways to impact the game with his passing. And I was surprised a little bit that the team didn't use that more, although it's not exactly like you're blessed with tons of time to practice for Summer League. But yeah, it'll be interesting with someone like Bebe, because Casey has mentioned this summer that he's a guy he'd like to try to find a couple of more minutes for during the season. And you wonder if there are some of those skills, the rebounding, the passing, that if pressed into action, maybe because of an injury or maybe because of, just things need to be shaken up, if he actually manages to get out of the court, because he has actual, at this point, NBA skills, unlike Bruno, who's still really figuring a lot of stuff out. And we kind of tend to lump them together, but Bebe is much, much further ahead in terms of his readiness to play in the NBA.
I got a question for you. Which of the following Raptors will make the All-Star team first? Norman Powell, Patrick Patterson, DeLon Wright, Corey Joseph, Bebe, or Bruno?
Oh, okay. Assuming I had to pick one, I would say Joseph, and it's only because I could envision a scenario, and I'm not expecting it, but I can envision the scenario playing out where Lowry and Casey do not find their common footing again, and the roster is rejiggered in such a way that if Joseph actually has another gear that he can go to, that maybe then he gets plucked into the starting lineup and they rejigger the talent elsewhere so that it's not too much of a drop off. But I mean, that's a far-flung scenario, but that's the only reason why I would say him. I don't know if there's anybody else there that would ever have the opportunity and to demonstrate enough.
All right,
But,
so another question.
Yeah.
Same multiple choice thing. Which of the following Raptors will be out of the league in 3 years? Powell, Patterson, DeLon Wright, Corey Joseph, Bebe, or Bruno? Most likeliest to be out of the league.
Oof. God, it seems so easy to say Bruno because he's obviously not an NBA player yet. And, the development curve, whatever. But, I mean, he's not an NBA player.
Yeah.
So I sort of have to go with Bruno. I mean, Powell, I guess, has bust potential, in that way that you fall in love with him in the summer and then you remember, okay, he's just a second-round pick and he falls out of the league. But
Quincy Doobie, yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so I could sort of see it with Powell, but if I actually had to pick, I'd probably go with Bruno, never quite taking these disparate skills that he's learning and turning them into an actual productive nightly contributor.
Okay. So given the D League team, Raptors 905, by the way, what do you think of that name? All right, that's good enough. Now that we got this D League team in Mississauga, does Bruno play a single meaningful NBA minute this upcoming season?
He shouldn't, and not even as a knock against him. I mean, this is a guy they literally bought this team for Bruno. I don't know when in the history of the NBA that's ever happened, but it's the right call. If you're going to use, it's a good thing to have, and if you're going to go on that, train with a guy like Bruno, where he basically has no NBA skills, and you're going to build an NBA player out of him, then I get it, and let that just be his playground. Get some reps in practicing with the big team when there's an opportunity, but just let his show be Mississauga. Guys who want to actually watch him play, get the little YouTube D-League pack, whatever it is, and go nuts. But I don't see any reason, except unless there's like a major emergency, to ever let him onto the court with the NBA team.
He's going to be a celebrity in Mississauga, man.
He's going to rule Mississauga. He's going to be everything in Mississauga.
It might get to his head. Like I can see this, being on ESPN on a fairly frequent basis, where D League team in Mississauga, like, people are chanting Bruno, and it's just hilarious. I don't know.
I guess
it might get to his head, though. I don't know.
No, I know. I mean, and that's a legitimate fear because he's still only 19 years old, and the whole lifestyle is brand new to him. And I'll be very curious because I don't know, because I'm trying to think off the top of my head how many NBA affiliates are D-League affiliates that are one-to-one are actually in the city, basically in the city that the main team is in. Because I don't think it's that many. And so it is just that. And with a team like the Raptors, where you can get 2,000 people to come out to watch the game outside of the arena, I mean, they're going to sell some tickets to that team. Yeah, I'll be curious. It's, what, with the whole D-League thing and Bruno and all the rest of it, I have no prediction and nothing but curiosity.
Bruno might even get a shoe deal with Payless Shoes.
Nice.
Let's talk about DeAndre Jordan for a second. I'm switching gears completely. Next on my agenda was Ronald Roberts, but forget him. Good luck to him. But DeAndre Jordan thing that happened. I'm sure people are sick of it, kind of. But what are your thoughts there about Jordan? Like, to me, I think this whole saga just spoke to his immaturity as a person more than anything.
Yeah, I mean,
or do you disagree?
No, I agree, and I don't have much of a problem with a lot of it. But the things that I have a problem with, I've got a big problem with. So the two ones for me are, that this team is now making moves to accommodate you, or at the very least, they're now turning down other moves like the Roy Hibbert trade because they feel they have you. And so there's significant machinations going on in the rest of the league that if you renege on that deal, I shouldn't renege. If you choose not to go forward with that deal, then it's going to have significant ramifications for that team. And if on Monday that you're probably not going to sign up, at least giving the heads up to Mark Cuban, who now has a decision to make. But waiting until you're getting to the Wednesday, and I mean, every day, every couple hours in free agency is a major amount of time. So the fact that he let it dangle for that long, and I get it, it's up to him, it's a major life choice, and so I get it, but at the same time, it's a significant hurdle to throw at the Mavericks. But even that didn't bother me as much as the not phoning him in the end, which is, I get it. I've listened to the Grantland podcast that JJ Redick went on, and he was saying that, it really is the agents should do it, but it was a unique circumstance. And because the team was going to be so screwed as a result. And look, tons of players have been this screwed by teams in all sorts of not choosing to pick up options. I mean, there's a million ways in which players' careers have been screwed in similar manners. So I can kind of forget the other side of it. But I don't know, but just not calling them after they've committed or willing to commit $90 million to you, it rubs me the wrong way. And I think it's like what you said. It's immaturity. It's not malice. It's not criminal or anything like that. It's just that if you were in that position, you would hope that you would behave in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's just a question of like when you know you're not going to do it, you got to call him and maybe calling him on whatever it was, July 9th. At that point, it doesn't really make a difference. But if you had doubts on Tuesday or Wednesday, you gotta call him. It's just as you said, free agency it moves so fast these days. I mean, before you used to have like major players available like a month in. Now 4 days in, like you're looking at Luis Scola.
Yeah, exactly. It was over.
Yeah. Let's get back to some Raptor talk. Earlier, you mentioned, the DeMario Carroll when we signed him, Mo Pete. That's exactly the guy that I was kind of projecting him to be as well. Is Mo Pete? And Mo Pete had people don't remember him, maybe he had a long and productive career with the Raptors, and he did really well. And I think if DeMario Carroll has even a career close to that, I think I would call that a success. But one guy that I remember Brian Colangelo tried to make a play for him was John Salmons, when John Salmons was actually in his prime, I guess. And he was supposed to be the 3-and-D guy, and the Raptors never got him. They got him much, much later. But DeMario Carroll is basically the John Salmons of like 7 years ago, kind of, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's fun because he's one of those sorts of guys that it's not that they're not common in the NBA, but there are enough of them, and they've been important for long enough that you feel like the Raptors have really been chasing them for a long time. I mean, if you're going now back to the Colangelo era, and if you're going to Mo Pete, you're going back to the Glenn Grunwald era. I mean, this is the kind of player that the Raptors have known they needed since they lost Tracy McGrady in 2000, and it feels like this is the first time they've had the right kind of fit. I mean, Turkoglu was a bigger name when they got him, but he obviously wasn't that player. Mm-hmm. He was purely offense, point forward, all the rest of it, and was Hedo Turkoglu in a disaster. But I mean, the Salmons one is sort of like that. I think even a little bit what they ended up trying to do with Anthony Parker had a little bit of that. It's he's just a guy that you feel like they've had a slightly lesser version of about 5 or 6 times, and you hope. I mean, I guess it's I don't know, maybe naive to assume that a role player like Carroll will for sure live up to his expectations in Toronto, but I'm optimistic. And yeah, it just feels like it's one of those sorts of guys that they've been swinging at for years and years and years and years, and finally managed to land one. And I think it speaks to how much they've wanted one that Ujiri made getting him such a priority and threw an offer at him that he felt he could feel free to cancel all the rest of his meetings over. I mean, it's interesting what his agent must have thought he was going to be getting on the open market, that he would cancel all the rest of his meetings after the Raptors offer, which A, demonstrated how serious Toronto was, and B, what the perceived market value was for him before July 1st.
Let's switch to some lineup talk at this point. So we got a bunch of role players. We also got James Johnson hanging around. Mm-hmm. He's Dwayne Casey's on record as saying that he might be playing almost not exclusively, but a lot of time at the power forward, at the backup power forward, which lends itself nicely to more small ball. And then you got Bismack Biyombo, a 6'9" center basically, who hasn't really panned out so far. But again, another low risk move by Ujiri. So we are really setting ourselves up to be a smallish GSW East team, although obviously a poor man's version. But really, all our personnel moves is dictating a particular style of play. Are you excited about the fact that the Raptors just might be Phoenix East of this era?
It'd be nice. I mean, it's the thing is that we still don't really know how Casey is going to deploy it all. And I think if there's ever a hesitation on any of it, it's that, because he also has talked about, well, Patterson, he sees him more as a bench guy. It's like, okay, well, does he mean that, like, ideally Patterson's a bench guy, but given this roster he'll start him because he probably should. But then he's talking in the same breath about, yeah, James Johnson playing more power forward. So is he looking at going small out of the gate? I mean, it's a roster that's actually versatile enough that I really feel insecure about really figuring what his rotation is going to be, because he could take it in so many different directions. And I think he personally took so many hits last year, this being Casey, on how he chose to deploy some of his players, and now his entire assistant staff has been remade. I'm curious to see if there's an overreaction to that, and that he now starts going a bit off the wall with some of his player combos, just because he can and because he sees the league. I mean, he has another interview that he had on NBA.com this weekend talking about how the league is going so much smaller and you have to be able to play that way, and so that speaks to how he might use James Johnson. But yeah, I mean, if he wanted to play a lot smaller and run up and down the court, he certainly could. But he always talks about when you do that, then you have to give up something on defense. And it sounds like defense is going to be it this year. So I'll be curious to see how he balances that out.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how he manages DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry. Just their Kyle Lowry's gambling on defense has been extremely detrimental. I mean, if you look at the playoffs, there are occasions where the guy just leaves his man to just wander off. And that's got to go punished. And one of my problems with Casey last year was that his, when it came down to dishing punishment or making examples in post-game press conferences, it wasn't always evenly spread out. It was definitely, geared towards Valanciunas and Ross. So that accountability needs to be across the board, not just concentrated with it like 2 or 3 players. So like if there's a coaching shift that I'm hoping he makes, as much as it is from a basketball perspective, what's happening on the court, it's just like treating players with the same level of, not respect, but at least same level of accountability as you do your star players.
And that's exactly what it is for me. It's either or, and where you either are going to protect your players, all of them, in the press as a rule, and let the discipline happen in the locker room, which is fine, or you're a guy that's going to go out and call it like it is for every single player as a rule. The idea that you're going to single some guys out and not other guys, I think, is it's a small way to do things. I think for me, that's like a small person does that. And I don't think Casey is a small person, and I think he'd probably defend the choice by saying that different players respond to different kinds of tactics. But I'm far more of the belief that it's every guy 1 through 15 can expect at least the same level of I don't know what, just discourse from their coach in the public sphere. Either they know that if they screw up they're going to get slammed, or they know that he'll speak highly of them and then slam them in practice. But it is one or the other.
So just round off the podcast with some Masai Ujiri talk. Respect to Ujiri. He's had a great offseason so far. I don't know if it's going to translate into the court, but on paper, certainly, the draft, the free agency, he's got it right again. And Norman Powell is just the icing on the cake at this point. So Masai Ujiri is great so far, man, as GM. Tim, just thoughts on the job he's done this summer.
Yeah, well, this summer I've really enjoyed, because it was the first time when he had a bit of money and was willing to spend it. And, as with the history of the Raptors, this includes Colangelo, but extends beyond him too, and prior to him. Whenever the Raptors would have some money to spend in a summer, they would find one guy and completely overvalue him, consider their entire summer made by going after him, and watch their hand. Everything else becomes sort of minimum deals and all that. And the thing that I liked about what Ujiri did is he had some money to spend, had multiple targets, and spread it out. And obviously Carroll, got a ton of that money, but it wasn't at the expense of signing other useful NBA players. And I totally agree. The job he's done this summer, which I think is his strongest summer yet, has been great. But all 3 summers he's refused to over leverage the team without there being a guarantee that it's going to pay off. He's not doubling down on this core. He's not looking at this group of players and saying this is obviously the team that's going to take us to the finals. He's saying I'm going to try to do my best to augment this core so that we know if we break it up, it was never going to happen with these guys. And I think this would be that year. I think that they've put the best supporting talent around them that they've ever had. And if the Valanciunas, DeRozan, Lowry, Troika can't make it work, then you say, okay, you know what? We gave it 3 years in addition to any years that happened before Ujiri got here. It's not going to work. We can safely say we'll start breaking it up without feeling like they didn't give it a fighting chance. And that's what I appreciated of what he did this summer.
Yeah, and this whole idea of not overcommitting yourself just based on the current roster. I mean, he's avoided that because those decisions haven't really propped up yet. Mm-hmm. The biggest one probably is going to be DeMar DeRozan next summer. Mm-hmm. I mean, DeRozan's not going to sign an extension at this point. He's definitely not going to opt into his $10.5 million deal. So it's going to be a question of are you going to pay DeMar DeRozan $25 million a year, going forward in the new cap, and that's going to be Ujiri's this summer was a big summer for him because he had to retool the team and he did a decent job of it, at least on paper. Mm-hmm. Next summer it's all going to be okay. Do I want to commit myself to a particular player? Yeah. Even the Kyle Lowry deal. I mean, we knew the cap was going to go up. It wasn't a bad deal at the time. It's not a bad deal today. But with DeRozan, there's a different math going on there.
That has Joe Johnson written all over it. Yeah. And the thing is that, and it was a similar situation to Joe Johnson, is if you're the Raptors and you choose to not re-sign him, it's not like you can just replace the productivity that he does give you with somebody else. I mean, maybe they can, but with everybody having that much money to spend, you're kind of up against it. And the fear, I guess, is that DeRozan doesn't have another gear. I mean, he's usually pretty good about coming back with another little something into his game every year. But let's say that this year he doesn't do that. Let's say that this is the first year where he's unequivocally either the same or maybe even a little bit worse than the season before. And you now have to decide, well, if we let him walk, then that's it. Then you're basically in a bit of a teardown mode. Or do you just suck it up, spend it, and hope that if it really starts to go sideways that you can unload him? It's one of the most, I think, honestly, it might be one of the most difficult decisions any Raptors GM has ever had to face. And I have no clue how he'll play it.
Yeah, just a little bit of hindsight related to Patrick Patterson. In hindsight, Patrick Patterson's making, he's 6.2 next year and $6 million the year after. Mm-hmm. In hindsight, that should have been a much longer deal. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, you wouldn't mind having Patrick Patterson on a 5-year deal at that money.
No, and Patterson is one of those guys too that I think any team benefits from having. He's again a high IQ player, low maintenance player. I wonder if it was a case of he took that money. Although no, it was considered a rich deal last time. I was going to say if he took that deal with the condition that it was less years. I don't know, but yeah, at this point, if you said that Patrick Patterson was the guy they had locked up at a deal like that for 4 years, I'd say, fine, great. Yeah. You can always find a use for him.
And they also have the option of extending Jonas Valanciunas again. Mm-hmm. But again, Jonas Valanciunas, it's going to be counting against the new cap because it's already too late. Thoughts on Valanciunas as an extension candidate, man? First of all, DeMar DeRozan, let's round this off. Are you comfortable paying him based on, say he comes back with, I don't know, better handles or something?
Sure.
You comfortable paying him like $25.5 million a year, basically the max contract, and what that might do to developing the other parts of the roster?
No. I mean, in a vacuum, no. But, there's so many moving parts that go around with that if it winds up happening that they do sign him, I'll get it. And I'd even probably be able to figure out how to defend it in a way, but I would never be comfortable with it. It would always feel like, okay, well, you've bought this car now, and you just kind of hope the wheels don't fall off of it.
What does he have to do? What does DeRozan have to do for you to be convinced that he is that max player? Like, what realistically, what does he have to do?
That's a good question. It would either be, and it's only one or the other. It doesn't have to be both. It's either he can get his 3-point shooting up to about 35%, or he learns how to play defense. And not Tony Allen defense, but defense enough that he's not the guy you're worrying about as a leaky part of the system. I think he's that close. But the thing is, both of those areas are crazy important in today's NBA. It's very hard to. I mean, you see how he can be bottled up and compelled to take bad shots, and they're bad 2-point shots. So the benefit is less if he winds up making them. And same thing with the defense. It's too leaky right now, and you can't have him be leaky with Lowry gambling and with Valanciunas slow-footed. If you could get either one of those things shorn up, I'd breathe a lot easier with him making a max deal. But as it is right now, it's just one too many just sub skills that would worry me.
Before we get to some final NBA talk to round the podcast up, I do want to ask you another multiple choice question here.
Okay.
Is that you have to wear one of these two jerseys out in public.
Okay.
Okay. Terrence Ross or Bismack Biyombo.
Oh, totally Biyombo.
Really?
I just
that easy?
That easy. I am so far off the Ross train. It is like I'm like Biyombo can barely play basketball. I mean, he's another one of those guys that has a couple of absolutely legit NBA skills, and they are in no way wrapped inside of a competent player's game. But but at this point, I haven't had to watch Charlotte every night for the last 4 years, and so I'm content with where Biyombo's at. Whereas with Ross, it's just been so many nights of just like it's just as an aesthetic irritant, just watching the game. Like it makes for ugly basketball, some of the choices he makes. And then what he'll do is every fifth night he'll become automatic from the corner, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe he's no. Then the next night it disappears again.
Biyombo did not make a field goal from outside the painted area last season. FYI.
He's not good.
Yeah.
He's not good. I mean, it's so long as he's the kind of guy they just sort of throw in there. I mean, he can play a little bit more than Steamsma did last year, but I mean, he's not good at basketball.
The other problem, sorry Tim to cut you off, I just want to give you the Biyombo thing, is that assistant coaches in Charlotte worked with him on when to clasp his hands in order to catch the ball. It was like as soon as you feel that ball hitting the palm, just like move your fingers. That's when you're gonna hold the ball. That's the level of rawness that Biyombo we're talking about here.
He feels like a bit of a throwback in that way, because about 7 or 8 years ago, so many of these guys you would end up drafting as these athletic specimens and figure you would teach them basketball, and it didn't work so many times that he's part of a dying breed. Like, teams right now are really way more interested in having guys come into the NBA that know how to play basketball. So now that I'm thinking about it, feel a nice sort of possessiveness of him as one of the last of these kinds of players who, and so is Bruno, these sort of guys who don't actually play basketball, but you have that sort of gregarious arrogance on the part of the team that they decided they can sort of turn him into a basketball player. Now I have a soft spot for Biyombo. So yes, it's an easier answer than it even was 30 seconds ago.
Oh yeah, there you go. So finals is just last few minutes here, just talking some NBA. First, I want to talk about the Lakers.
Mm-hmm.
What are they doing? Like, what's the plan here? They got Lou Williams, who wants to, in his own words, take the pressure off of Kobe a little bit, take some shot. They got Swaggy P there. Now they got Roy Hibbert, and they drafted a pretty good player in the draft, and then you got Kobe. So what's the plan for this year? Like what is Kobe's role? Like what are they doing? Help me understand if you understand.
I mean, the only thing that I understand about them is they are operating on a team building playbook that is about 15 years old, and it's that idea of just have a star, put some competent players around him, and it'll work out. I mean, it's actually a team that very much reminds me of how teams would be built before the Thibodeau defense era, when there was actually as advanced defensive schemes as there were offensive schemes. And you look at that team is going to be so easy to bait into bad shots. It's not even a case of really having to play crazy hard defense to slow these guys down, you'll be able to bait them into enough bad shots to win a game. And you've got trying to figure out how to split time between Clarkson and Russell, trying to figure out what you're going to do now that you have a post-bound power forward in Julius Randle. Who knows what the hell they're going to do with Roy Hibbert, who, gets about 3 rebounds a game and will now never see the ball on offense because there's just not enough of it. I get it because I know what they're trying to do. It's just asinine. It's an arrogant organization that has no clue that players in the league have moved beyond the gaga look of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of embarrassing for exactly the reasons.
It's like their pitch to LaMarcus Aldridge was the same pitch they made to Shaq, and they expected it to work.
Yeah, exactly. They are just operating in a totally different sphere. And it'll be interesting if in a year from now, when Kobe's contract is off the books, that it turns out that, okay, we get it. We knew we couldn't do anything with Kobe's money anyway, so we punted a couple of years, whatever. Now we're going to start. But I really don't believe that that's where the organization is at.
Mm-hmm. Will the Raptors be challenged at all this year for the Atlantic? They got Boston, New York, Brooklyn, and whatever the hell Philly's doing. Any challenge whatsoever? Or who is the biggest challenger to the Raptors in terms of division?
Probably Boston, but they still have their own things to figure out in their, 40 power forwards that they've grabbed this summer. But yeah, they don't really scare you. I mean, they're just one of those sorts of teams that if the Raptors kind of fumble, they would be the only team that I could look at as being that young, scrappy, talented underdog that could claw their way at them. But on paper, no team should be able to even get within 10 games of the Raptors by the end of the season. So if even that happens, I think something either went wrong for Toronto or went really right for Boston or one of the New York teams.
Yeah, I would have picked the Knicks just because Lopez, Aflalo, Derek Williams, they're NBA players. And,
that's true.
Porzingis, is a rookie, but I think he's going to be decent. And they got Langston Galloway, who kills the Raptors. So I think they got enough pieces that they might be competitive, maybe sneak into the playoffs. So I'd rank them ahead of the Celtics a little bit.
That's fair.
Finally, prediction time.
Okay.
Who's coming out of the East next year? Or is it too easy?
It's too. I mean, you're almost like just being a contrarian to not say Cleveland.
Yeah.
But it feels like the only competitors to Cleveland, which was really just the Hawks in a way, they feel like they've been weakened. I mean, like Washington did well to recover from Pierce going in terms of they got other decent players, but they don't replace that kind of, again, that veteran guy who will play that Pierce gave them. Yeah. So I feel like they're a bit weaker coming back. I feel like Atlanta's weaker coming back. And I don't know that anybody has really made the jump. I mean, maybe a fully healthy Miami they're not good, but no, they're not coming out of the East. So no, I think it's Cleveland unless a major trade happens at some point during the season.
Yeah, and that's a bit boring to me. It really was. I was hoping like one of the teams could kind of make a few moves and restore some sort of competition in the East, but it doesn't look like it.
No.
And in the West, any thoughts on the West? Do you think this Ty Lawson trade does anything for Houston?
It might. I mean, if I'm a team taking on Ty Lawson, I am terrified that he just doesn't have the mentality. And I mean, this is irrespective of the substance abuse, which is like a legitimate problem. But let's assume that by the time training camp rolls around, that he has that to some degree under control, which I've got no clue if that's a realistic expectation. But let's say it was. Then I still don't know if he's the kind of guy that understands how to fit into a winning system. And I get that Houston needed, or they felt that they needed a better starting point guard. And I get that he fits in what they want to do in terms of jacking a lot of threes, but he's a high usage player and James Harden is a high usage player. And the two of them playing together, I think could be a disaster, because if you're taking touches away from James Harden to give them to Ty Lawson, then you've just taken a step backwards, even if the talent at the point guard took a step forward.
All right, Tim. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Hour-long pod. We got to have you on more often, man. What are we going to do about this?
I know. We say it every time. It's true.
Talk soon, man.
Absolutely.